Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES TV.
Hello, Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this is a week of putting on one type of mask and being able to take off another, as COVID rules were being swept aside like beads on a street. We'll look tonight at these days of arriving monarchs and falling mandates. We'll also look at the best and worst of the Carnival season and what the current police shortage means for the next Mardi Gras. Elsewhere, there's the real world, where there are the inevitable controversies of redistricting and where the war in Ukraine has become an issue in this fall's Louisiana Senate race. Crimes were relatively low during Carnival, but a few deserve a closer look. We'll examine. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, LeBron Joseph, news anchor and reporter, WGNO TV Channel 26, Tyler Bridges, reporter of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Ramon Antonio Vargas, reporter of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. We're going to go first over to LeBron for the latest on COVID, our numbers and our restrictions.
Well, falling, as you alluded to in the open, the numbers continue to fall. I think in the last couple of days, Louisiana, first of all, the dashboard hadn't been updated in almost 2 weeks now. But there are indications on the website where, in fact, the numbers are falling statewide. This is a look from some slides that Dr. Jennifer Avegno used the other day when she spoke about dropping the mask mandate. And this is a look at what the average daily count or the cases are in Orleans Parish. Percent positivity at 2.5%, which is well below the 10% that they would want us to be at. The 7-day average is about 44 here in the city of New Orleans. Dr. Avegno also alluded to, when asked why, in fact, the heavy hand considered by some of the mask mandate and the vaccine mandate. She pointed to this slide comparing the deaths per 100,000 in Orleans Parish in Delta and Omicron versus our neighbors in Jefferson, St. Tammany, Tangipahoa. I'm not sure if she meant to needle those surrounding parishes, but also to say, hey, we think we've been successful for a reason. Of course, another thing that they pushed here in New Orleans and has done probably better than most parts of the state is the vaccine status, 67.4%, and that's all residents, and that includes young people as well. Pretty good stuff. The current risk level, and as we mentioned, that 2.4 or 2.5% of percent positivity. To be in green in any map or graph these days is a pretty good deal, and to have Orleans Parish there is a good thing. And of course, in the end, mask mandate lifted on March 3rd yesterday, or 2 days ago, I should say. Taking a look at what the numbers are going to look like in the next 2 weeks, that analysis, because of course we won't know for a few days, but all signs point to the fact that by March 21st, if Orleans remains low transmission, then the vaccine mandate for restaurants and some of the other businesses can go away. It's something certainly the businesses are looking forward to. Dr. Avegno said that the testing and the monitoring that they've done throughout the Mardi Gras season also pointed toward us being able to make that change on the 21st, and that's what everyone's hoping for.
No, we heard about the mask mandate being lifted in Orleans, and it was just there in Orleans, right? I mean, not in any other parish in, our metro area. You're taking a look at what went on in Mardi Gras, both indoor and outdoors. You didn't see many masks other than Carnival masks.
That is correct. I think that many folks, if you were sort of going to places where you're going to be in groups inside, you may have worn that mask to go to wherever you're going. There was a controversy about the mayor and how she behaved and some other elected officials during her Mardi Gras ball. I looked at pictures and videos and social media from just about every Mardi Gras ball there was, and besides the Mardi Gras mask, Marcia, there weren't very many others. And just as I said, I think people wear it to the ball. But once you start, eating a little something or drinking a little something or whatever, the mask goes away and probably doesn't come out for the rest of the night. The only other thing I'll mention about this whole mask mandate thing as well, that one slide where it compares Orleans to the other surrounding parishes. Dr. Avegno pointed back to that when asked about the lawsuit that some residents had filed versus the city, the mayor, the school board head, as well as Dr. Avegno, all named in that, and the Attorney General Jeff Landry had signed on to that lawsuit, if you will. Of course, that lawsuit becomes moot now because the mask mandate has been dropped, but she said the results of what happened in Orleans Parish and how they were able to keep those numbers lower than other places more than justifies why, in fact, the city took those steps.
Well, the mask mandate has been removed. But as you noted, there's still the required vaccination or proof of a negative test for ages, 5 and up, for children 5 and up, anybody who is now eligible for a vaccine. That still remains in place. And the suit involved that as well, not just the mask.
That is correct. The suit involved that as well. But lawsuits move fairly slow. Fairly slow. If, in fact, this next 2.5 weeks goes by and those vaccine mandates have been removed, I think it weakens that lawsuit even more. You could probably sue for what would be considered damages during the mandates. I imagine that's still on the table, if you will, but it certainly weakens the case to sort of get rid of them.
So now we just have to wait and see what these next 2 weeks or so will bring, to see what these big crowds all over, which we're happy they were there and everybody was having fun.
Fingers crossed.
What it'll bring. Okay, LeBron, thanks so much. Let's go on over to E right now, and let's talk about this Mardi Gras season. I mean, everybody was happy to have it come.
Yeah, well, I've said that the most important Mardi Gras, at least in contemporary New Orleans, was the 2006 Mardi Gras, because that was right after Katrina, when the world's media was camped out here, figuring New Orleans was on life support, waiting to see what happened, and waiting to pronounce the city as dying. Instead of dying, we staged a Mardi Gras, and it was a good one. Some of the crews combined, and some of the floats had blue tarps on them. But that was the Mardi Gras that showed that New Orleans is alive and coming back. I think the second most important Mardi Gras was the one last Tuesday, because it was the same kind of situation. Now, whereas Hurricane Katrina was a local situation and COVID was worldwide, there was still, Mardi Gras drew a lot of attention to the city. And it was a real sign of what's going to happen here, what the future is. And the fact that we really came back strong. I mean, it wasn't just a mediocre Mardi Gras, so it was very good. There were some issues. There was crime, which we'll talk about a little bit later. There was the issue of the shortened routes, which had to do with the number of police. We'll talk about that too. But overall, the crew of Knicks had an issue. It lost a lot of its members, and something that's never happened before. A lot of the members that it lost formed sub-crews that attached onto other crews. And for example, one group formed a crew of Jiminy, which attached to another crew. And you may see these come back as crews on their own. But overall, it was successful. The weather certainly cooperated. It was really great weather and a great mood. I want to call on LeBron for a second, though, because I happen to know that he was up at 5 o'clock Mardi Gras morning and went to Treme with a whole other spectrum of Carnival.
Yeah, apparently I had a buddy there in Tyler as well, but we were at the Skull and Bones, which started over at the Little People's Place at 5 a.m. I think what warmed my heart, Errol, is not only seeing that, probably larger crowds than I've ever seen with them, but also that Mardi Gras returned back to the neighborhoods, and that is one of those celebrations. The Mardi Gras Indians we covered in the Lower Ninth Ward and uptown off of Magazine as well, and then back in Treme for more Mardi Gras Indians, several tribes throughout the entire day. The Baby Dolls starting their second line from Kermit's with a brass band up Claiborne Avenue. So Mardi Gras for folks that live here is it's the big parades and all that, but it's also the neighborhood celebrations, and that was fantastic. They were all great.
And so let's talk crowds in general, also in the Bywater in Marigny, and then the crowds along the main route of St. Charles and then down into Canal and in the Quarter, of course. Were we at the same, would you say we were about there as
I think we were
pre-pandemic?
about there. We were able to navigate the city really well on Mardi Gras Day, but if you were near the parade routes, it was definitely huge crowds around those Indians and all of that. It was what it normally is, people out and about, but it didn't appear to be the overflow crowds where, in fact, you couldn't get from one city to the other, probably worst on Endymion Saturday in Mid-City, you know, because that's where everyone is and it's jammed in there. But beyond that, I mean, beyond the parade routes, it was fairly easy to navigate the rest of the city.
According to figures in the Times-Picayune, overall attendance seems like it was down, but not at a bad level. There was still a lot of people.
Yes.
Over the weekend, the downtown hotels had like 85% occupancy. The last time we had Mardi Gras parades 2 years ago, they were at 95% occupancy. And so there was that much of a difference. But I got to tell you, with all the uncertainty about COVID and people talking about crime and all of that, I mean, it's amazing that that many people came. And so there was good attendance. And a lot of people are still coming in from out of town. And one thing that people don't realize is that not all the people coming from out of town are coming here to watch a parade. A lot of them are being in parades, especially with those big crews like Orpheus and Bacchus and Endymion, that they're bringing in a lot of people. And so they really have an economic impact.
Well, people were ready for Mardi Gras, so it looks like everybody had a good time. And let's go on over to Ramon right now, because while, you know, it seemed to be a quiet Mardi Gras, there are still some incidents that were really tragic.
Yes, namely, you're referring to the killings of two out-of-town tourists who were in town for the Carnival celebration. One of them was 15-year-old Heaven Nettles from Houston, who was in a line at a food truck about 2 blocks off the route for Endymion, and there was a shooting that erupted near her. You know, her father described her to me, you know, backing away from the danger and then just falling. She, by all indications, was hit by a stray bullet. Obviously, had nothing to do with the dispute that kind of led to the shooting. A little earlier, it was something that initially kind of escaped under the radar, but I was able to report on Fat Tuesday, was a 33-year-old man from South Carolina by the name of Brandon Bovane, was checking into his hotel with his girlfriend and his younger brother, and then needed to go back to his car to get something. As he goes out there, someone in one car shoots at someone in another car, and he's digging around his own vehicle to try to find the thing that he's looking for to kind of finish checking in, and he gets hit by a bullet again that by no indications was was meant for him. So that was less than 24 hours before Heaven's killing. Obviously, that is about the worst case scenario for the city. I would say that right on the route, as far as I can recall, there was one shooting, which would certainly be less than we've seen in other years, as far as violence goes. But obviously, these were two people that were drawn to the city from out of town by the celebrations leading up to Fat Tuesday, and so that certainly made. I was kind of taking stock yesterday, and certainly I think the Associated Press moved a story kind of leading with two revelers killed, two out-of-town revelers killed during New Orleans Mardi Gras celebrations. That was exactly the headline the city doesn't want. And in addition to, obviously, these families who have forever been changed in unimaginable ways because of what happened. And then lastly, on Fat Tuesday, there was the very strange and scary encounter at the Boot right by Tulane and Loyola University's Uptown, in which there was some sort of fight that involved a patron trying to get into the bar, the Boot, right on Broadway and Zimple, was turned away at the door for one reason or another, and that sets off a fight that draws in several doormen, and 6 people, including the patron, were injured. They said 4 had cutting injuries, and so that's the kind of headline that I think I think if you're looking for an excuse to kind of to show that New Orleans is dangerous and the crime's out of control, those are exactly the headlines that people point toward. But certainly those 3, that incident wasn't necessarily right on the route, but certainly people are out because of the celebration.
But by and large, the feeling sort of is it was a pretty quiet Mardi Gras, which is positive.
Absolutely, and especially like on the route, I know that there were concerns about manpower, and I know we'll discuss that a little later, and the route was altered because of that, but certainly on the route, things things for the overwhelming part seem to go relatively peacefully.
Okay, great, Ramon. Like you said, we're going to talk about the NOPD manpower situation in just a little bit. Let's go on over to Tyler right now, and off Mardi Gras, let's talk about politics and redistricting in the state of Louisiana. Louisiana Legislature just finished their session, so any big changes?
Yeah, in the end, the special redistricting session that was held in Baton Rouge, it really didn't alter the boundaries or the makeup of the legislature. The new legislative boundaries will go into effect next year when the legislature is up for election along with the governor. The legislature also redrew the lines for the 6 members of the House, and those are pretty much unaltered. And they also drew the lines for the what's known as Bessie, and also the Public Service Commission. And so we have a situation today where Republicans have majority. They hold 5 of the 6 seats in Congress, in the House, and they also hold a big majority in both the state Senate and the state House, and that will continue. We had the leadership of the legislature. They made a point of trying to redraw the boundaries in ways that would help incumbents, and so the end result is pretty much the same thing for the next 10 years in terms of the makeup of both the House, of the Senate, and the Congress.
But Tyler, what seemed like a big issue going into the session was creating the second black majority district, and that didn't happen. And it seemed like it was one thing that was almost a certainty. So what happened?
Yeah, I don't think it was ever a certainty, Errol. I think the end result is probably what would have been expected. You know, the Republicans were in control, and to create a second black congressional district in Louisiana would have meant sacrificing the seat held by Julia Letlow, who is based up in northeast Louisiana. And Republicans in Louisiana and Republicans nationally did not want that to happen. Now, still ahead is to see whether the governor vetoes the congressional map. He still has the power to veto any of the maps passed by the legislature. And of course, these maps are also going to go to the, before some of these courts will probably end up in court, and that could alter it. So we could end up, in theory, with a second black congressional district if the courts require it.
So we are looking at the continuation of a majority GOP legislature, it seems, that, as you've written, perhaps for the next decade. But were there any changes of note that were made?
Yeah, so over the redistricting is based on the census that's taken nationally, and in the state of Louisiana, it accounts for population changes. So over the past 10 years, there's been a population loss in the north of Louisiana and a gain in the south. So both in the State House and Senate, one district that was previously based up in the northern part of the state is now being moved to the southern part of the state. And the other big fight during the legislative session on redistricting was whether to create more black majority seats. That's what the black legislators, the black Democrats, were pushing, and the Republicans ultimately said no to that. So it's status quo on that front as well.
Louisiana has had a majority of people registered as Democrats. Has that changed?
Yeah, so 20 years ago, the state was overwhelmingly Democratic. Now, only about 40% of the state's voters are registered Democrat, just a few more than Republicans. And what's happening is people have switched over to the Republican Party who were previously Democratic, or they still may be a Democrat but vote Republican. You know, only the state has only one Democrat holding statewide elected office, and that's the governor. And again, the 2 senators are Republican, and otherwise Republicans hold all the levers of power in the state.
And so in what ways has the Democratic Party changed in the state of Louisiana?
Yeah, Marcia, the big changes over the past 20 years are the loss of white Democrats. And so today, the majority of registered Democrats in the state are African American, where 20 years ago it was white folks. And today, 80% of the Democrats in the legislature are African American, whereas 20 years ago it was only 30%. So there's fewer Democrats overall, and the numbers of African Americans is much larger.
Touch on real quickly the state Supreme Court. Any changes there?
Yeah, the Supreme Court has not been redistricted since 1997. The legislature keeps taking a stab at it and whiffing, and that's what happened again. So over the last more than 25 years, the districts have gotten out of whack. They should all have basically the same population, but the legislature could not agree to new boundaries this time. Again, there was a push to create a second black seat on the Supreme Court as well.
Okay, so we just need to wait to see what the governor's going to do.
That's the next step.
Okay.
Yep.
All righty. Thanks a lot, Tyler. Ramon, back over to you. NOPD shortage, staff shortage. How did it impact this Mardi Gras? How will it impact next Mardi Gras?
I mean, certainly this Mardi Gras, the biggest thing that we saw was the route that we're all used to seeing uptown was shortened, right? And the reason that the city provided was just having inadequate manpower. I would say that if there are arrangements that we've certainly seen where you can bring officers from other agencies in. I mean, that costs money, but certainly if you want to return the portion that was removed from the route, that's an option. They'll call it force multipliers, and we've seen whether it's at the federal level or at the state level or just kind of agencies from the surrounding area that could provide officers. One of the tricky things is obviously that the NOPD operates in a much different way, given the federal reform pact that the agency entered in 2012 and is still in effect. That said, I have always been one of the people to just kind of qualify that certainly a shortage is relative. We've seen the NOPD be at this size when it had, in terms of deadly violence, its most peaceful year in my lifetime, when it registered a 47-year low, and the city registered a 47-year low in the number of homicides over a year in 2019. The police department wasn't significantly smaller. There's plenty of research out there that kind of goes against the idea that more police equals more public safety. That said, certainly, I think the New Orleans Police Department will always prefer to have more officers, and so I think that we've seen years where the city has had relatively peaceful years with the police department at its current size.
Ramon, haven't you said that there's a real division now with a lot of younger police and then the older police, and not so much the middle ground police? Sure.
I think what I would stress to that is that certainly the makeup of the police department now is relatively unique in that for a number of reasons you're seeing officers who maybe had about 5 years or a little more on the force have been leaving in large numbers. There's a lot of theories. If you talk to the unions, they'll give a reason. Certainly I think one of the most commonly cited is kind of the nationwide perspective on policing as a profession following the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis in Memorial Day 2020. That's one of the ones that's most cited. So you have kind of a very young force, and then you've got people who've been there, lifers, and even then we've seen people with 25 years on the job leaving for opportunities in other cities that maybe aren't kind of facing some of the same challenges that New Orleans is when it comes to violent crime. So certainly I think the makeup of the police department is very unique right now, and I'm curious to see what that's going to mean for the agency in 3 or 4 years. But I think that just the sheer size of the number of officers, that fewer officers means a less safe city. There's plenty of research that shows that that's not the case. But I think certainly it is fair to look at whether the current makeup of the police department, which is either very young or very experienced without much of the middle there, what that means for the city's safety as well as just the agency's operations is valid.
All right, Ramon, thanks a lot. Tyler, we're going to wrap up with you, and let's touch real quickly on the upcoming race for Senate and how the war in Ukraine is factoring into that right now.
Yeah, it's still pretty early in the Senate race where John Kennedy is seeking a second term. He's the Republican who was elected in 2016, but he'd been the treasurer for a long time. He'd also been a Democrat as a treasurer, and now he's become a strong supporter of President Trump and critic of President Biden. And the national handicappers say he is an overwhelming favorite. But the Democrats are actually putting up something of a fight early on. Gary Chambers, who is a progressive from Baton Rouge, he's run 2 very provocative online ads. Folks may have seen them. In one of them, he smoked a I guess it's called a blunt. I didn't quite know what it was, to show my ignorance here. It's a marijuana cigarette with tobacco, saying, hey, we should make this legal and decriminalize those who are caught with small amounts of the drug. And then he also came up with an online ad where he burned a Confederate flag and decried the racism, the ongoing racism in Louisiana and the country. And all that was drowning out the first Democrat who got in the race, a guy named Luke Mixon, who graduated from the Naval Academy, spent 20 years as a fighter pilot in the Navy, a guy who's trying to portray himself as the second coming of John Bell Edwards, who had gone to the West Point and served in the Army. And so Luke Mixon had been sort of, not much had been heard about him, with Gary Chambers getting all the attention among the Democrats. But Luke Mixon just came out with an online ad that attacks John Kennedy really from the right by basically saying that Kennedy is soft on Russia, soft on Vladimir Putin, criticizes Kennedy for having gone to Russia and meeting at the Kremlin on July 4th of 2018. So it's an interesting thing to see a Democrat attacking a Republican from the right.
But as you say, we're just beginning this race, which is in the fall. And of course, Senator Kennedy has very deep pockets right now, a lot of money in his war chest.
Yeah, he's sitting on $11 million. It's much, much more money than Gary Chambers or Luke Mixon. And Kennedy has come out lately with the war in Ukraine, calling Putin a pariah.
Okay, Tyler, thanks a lot. All right, guys, time for other stories. E, start over with you.
Well, March is always one of the more festive months in the year. We've already got off to a fast start with Mardi Gras on March 1st. You know, we have St. Joseph's Day and St. Patrick's Day. We also have the NCAA finals, college basketball finals. So it's going to be a lot of activity during the month of March.
All righty. LeBron?
Festive, yes, in March, but also festivals on the way. And just this week, the Essence Festival drops their big schedule. And the big name, Janet Jackson. So a lot of folks excited about seeing her come back later in the year.
And that's this summer, right? For Essence. Okay, Ramon.
A child molester and former teacher was released too early, 7 years too early. I had a very small part in reporting this. My colleague David Hammer kind of exposed it, got him locked back up, but the story is crazy in that David and his photographer TJ Pipitone got attacked, and it is worth reading that story both on WWL-TV and NOLA.com.
Okay, we'll take a look at it. Tyler?
Was that the case, Ramon, where a guy was wielding a wrench-chasing hammer?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Holy cow.
All right, Tyler.
All right, so very quickly, Donald Trump is going to be in town this weekend. He's not going to be in a public setting. It's closed doors. He's meeting with big Republican donors. And Mike Pence is in town Friday night also to meet with big Republican donors.
All righty. Thanks, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, too. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES TV.